Hi everyone. Today we're going to look at 4 orchids that were rootless when I made the last video about them on July 17th, which is about 6.5 months ago. So I figured I'd update you on their progress. So just to refresh your memory, we're dealing with orchids W4, W5, W6, and W7. And we'll begin with W5, which has an interesting history. Hard to believe that it looked like this 6.5 months ago. It had 2 big leaves. It also had a big long green spike. And up until about, I would say, 3 weeks ago, it was in a container like this, but the big leaves had disappeared. And I was left with this little thing attached to its former spike like this. And it was just like dangling, in the middle of the jar. And what happened with it is it developed 6 humongous roots. I mean, really fat roots. Similar to roots like this. This was the size of them, if you can imagine. There were, I think, 6 of them, and with this little, hanging off of this little orchid. And obviously, I took my eye off the ball with this one, and I was so intrigued with the size of the roots that I just kept watering it. Now you have to remember that all of these orchids had no roots. And the technique that I use is every other day without fail, I'll fill them up to about here with water for 30 to 45 minutes. I'll have mycorrhizae powder mixed in with fertilizer so that roots will develop. And over time, the roots develop. So after these big fat roots developed, here you can see the size of them, I kept watering it rather than taking that as a sign that I've overwatered it and that basically they were becoming like balloons. I kept watering it because I just didn't have any experience with it. So over time, a few things developed, leading me to the conclusion that things were not right with this orchid. The first thing was that the leaves stopped growing and they became flaccid. And I said, uh-oh, something's up here. And then little black spots developed on the roots. And again, I really wasn't paying much attention to it. I have 80 orchids now, and so this was all going under the radar to some extent. So I have little black spots on the roots. The leaves are getting flaccid. They're not hard and robust anymore. And the most important thing on closer inspection is, if we take a look at this orchid, you can see that at all of the points where there's a junction between the root and the stem, they're healthy. But that wasn't the case with this orchid. And what I realized too late was that all of those points were black with fungus and compromised. So much so that a couple had loosened from the stem and were almost dangling by a thread. And it was at that point that the light bulb went off in my brain and I realized I had overwatered it. So I was left with kind of a quandary. The leaves had stopped growing, the roots had stopped growing, and I really didn't know what to do. I couldn't water the roots anymore. So what I did is I decided, well, let me try just spraying the roots roots every morning until they turn dark green. And this way they won't be sitting in water for a long period of time. And so I did that, and lo and behold, the leaves started firming up. And if you can see way on the inside, there's a new little leaf forming. So I said, okay, now I'm on the right track with this one. And of course, it's going to take months and months and months to get back to anything resembling this. In any event, the thought of having to spray this every day just didn't sit well with me anymore. I mean, I have enough to do, and so I decided, well, let me put it in bark. So I got this little 3-inch container, and what I'm going to do with this is determine its dry weight and use that as a gauge for watering in the future. So let's see what it weighs in at. And it's looking like 2.3 ounces. So knowing that there's a very real potential for rot, I'm going to be very careful about how I water this. And probably no more than a quarter to a half an ounce of water each time I water it. And then I'll just let it sit for about a week until it comes back down to 2.3 ounces. So my fingers are crossed, and I'm hoping for the best for this little orchid. Well, let's move on to Orchid W7. And the last time we looked at this, there were no roots at all. So what you're looking at here is 6.5 months of growth. That's how long it takes. That's how much patience is required. Needless to say, I've become very paranoid about the size of the roots. And you can see this is getting a little bulbous here. And there's plenty of water in these roots. And the critical thing is that the junctions, or where the roots unite with the stem, are okay. And I'll be on the lookout for that. Additionally, the leaves, the new leaves, are in very good condition. They're nice and firm, and there's some growth happening there. So since November 28th, watering has been very sparse. You can see on November 28th, I gave it 12 hours. You know, I'm experimenting to see what happens, and then I'll weigh it and see how much water it takes in. And then after that, I decided I don't want to play with fire here. So you can see December 22nd, and from then on, 1 ounce sprayed in, then 1/4 ounce, then 1/2 ounce, and then recently a little over 1/2 ounce that I sprayed in, and then ended up dumping water, you know, the following day. So it's not taking in tremendous amount of water. And that was apparent way back in November, because you could see the next time I watered it was almost a month after, on December 22nd. And at that point, I only added 1 ounce. And then almost 3 weeks went by, added another 1/4 ounce. Then a week went by, 1/2 ounce. And now, what's this, January 19th to February 2nd, it doesn't even take in 0.6 ounces of water. So these are all important indicators of the fact that it's saying, you know, just leave me alone. You know, I really don't need that much water, and I'm fine the way I am. Next up is W6, and I made several videos about this one in the past. I think in the first video, these leaves were relatively small, minute compared to where they are today. So there's been tremendous leaf growth at the expense of the other leaves. The other leaves become like martyrs, And what they do is they sacrifice themselves so that there can be root growth and then the growth of new leaves. And that's what happened with this. So let's take it out of the jar and take a look at it. So 6 months ago, all of these roots that you see here were just little nubs beginning to form. And so this is after 6.5 months. And down here, there was nothing but terminated roots. This root had terminated here, so this is all new growth. This root here had terminated here. This is all new growth. Additionally, we have a spike developing. Now, I forgot to mention when talking about the method that I use where I soak it every other day, that goes on until roots develop. And at that point, the orchid goes back with its other normal orchids, and it's treated just like a regular orchid then because it has roots. So beginning around mid-December, I really started watering this, and you know, I was psyched about having all these new roots. I thought I could get more water up to the leaves. So every week, 24 hours, I'd water at 6 a.m., dump it the following morning at 6 a.m. And what happened, I'm going to zero in on it here, was this particular root rotted right here at the juncture. And I said, uh-oh. And it still collapses. It's dry now, but it still collapses when you squeeze it. Everything below it is okay. So that was a real warning sign to me, you know, be careful with the watering. And now I've cut back, you know, pretty drastically. So the last time I watered it, I just sprayed in 1 ounce so that these bottom roots and the tips on the bottom were touching the water. And then after 24 hours, if there was any water left, I just dumped it. So that's what's going on with this one. Up next is another very successful outcome. This is W4. And if you look at that video of July 17th, these leaves are tiny. I think there were only 2 leaves at the time, and there were no roots. Now let's take it out and have a look at the roots. And this one has been wildly successful. And they're all different. They all react differently. You never can predict what's going to happen with these things. This one has tremendous root growth happening right now. And these are all new roots that have developed over the past 6.5 months. Let me turn it over for you. So you can see when we started, I said it had no roots, but it had this terminated root. It's dark and woody, and I had no idea what would happen with these, and nothing really became of these roots. There weren't any buds coming off of them in 6.5 months, so everything, all this green stuff you see is brand new. So I'm very happy with this one, and W4 will go on to become a model citizen in the orchid community, along with its other friends. And hopefully by next year, I'll get a nice bloom out of it, and that'll be the reward. All right, thanks for joining me once again. Have a great day.